Welcome. My name is Steve Stein. I'm the host of the StreetSmart Wisdom Podcast, founder of Better Listen and Wisdom Feed, and we're really excited to have Sharon Salzberg here. We are going to discuss real life, the journey from isolation to openness and freedom. When we feel cut off or trapped, we can let those difficulties steer us onto a path toward an authentic, flourishing life, living in a way that allows us to find the wholeness that lies within. Even when we're alone, a sense of community can accompany us through the stormy times. Our words, hearts, and actions can line up with a larger vision, rather than the smaller views our anxious, fearful thoughts arouse in us. Welcome, Sharon.
Thank you so much. It's a great delight to be here.
Yeah, no, it's wonderful. So, just curious, how long has this book? How long did it take you to write the book? I know it's a lifetime of experience, but is this something that I'm curious about the origin of the book.
Well, I wrote the book while I was here in Barre, Massachusetts. I live next door to the retreat center, the Insight Meditation Society, through the forest. And I also have in the past rented an apartment in New York City. So I came up here March 14th, 2020, because I had just recently gotten back to New York from traveling and teaching. And, it was high anxiety. Lots of people were starting to get ill, and tremendous anxiety and unsettledness. And I had the thought, I think I'll go up to Barre for 2 weeks and ride it out, and then I'll come back when it's done. So I have a house here, an apartment there. I thought, yeah, I'll go up for 2 weeks. So I came up here in March with my snow boots, and 8 months later, I was still here. And in the realization that I was going to be here for a while and living a very restricted life in terms of social contact, I was teaching a tremendous amount online, and I felt very connected to what people were going through, very, very connected. But I wasn't traveling. I wasn't doing anything that resembled my normal life. And the publisher actually contacted me and said, would you like to write another book, maybe something in the Real series? So I got on the Real train a while ago with Real Happiness. And I thought about it, and I had never had the opportunity to write a book without traveling before, grabbing an hour here and there when I could to write. And the prevailing question for me in that time was, what's still true? Like, what am I counting on? What do I rely on? What's steadying me? What's supporting me? And also seeing this show on YouTube called Saturday Night Seder, which gave me the arc of the book, which we can talk about in a minute, if you like. I thought, okay, there is a book. And so it took me a few months, not very many, because I didn't need it, not leading my normal life. And the arc was very clear to me. Not only was I living it, but I was witnessing so many people living it.
And living, I guess the subtitle, The Journey from Isolation to Openness and Freedom.
Yeah.
Now, it's a lot easier now to talk about openness and freedom, and thank goodness we can walk around without masks. But so you were so tell me more about the arc and the Seder, because I know from Seders.
Right. So I watched this show in 2020, and again, I watch it a lot, called Saturday Night Seder. It was one of the first programs, I think, made without the writers being gathered together in one room. And it had brilliant musicians, and it was very funny, and I learned a lot from the rabbis. And it reminded me that in the symbolic view of the Seder, first of all, the Seder is the celebration of a journey of all people at all times looking for freedom. And that what the word Egypt means, actually taking it totally away from geopolitics, it means the narrow straits, the narrow place. So it is exactly that journey from being narrow, feeling trapped, feeling overwhelmed, feeling defined by the circumstances of our lives, to openness and freedom. And I thought that is the arc of a book right there. Because it's a fascinating journey. And, I want to distinguish that state of constriction and narrowness from being purposeful and determined and one pointed and so on, because it doesn't mean any of that. We can have all of that without that sense of not being able to breathe and not seeing options and feeling really imprisoned by circumstance and so on. And it's a very classical journey. It's certainly a very classical journey within Buddhist teaching, which is what I'm most familiar with. And so I just took it, and ran with it.
So the Saturday Night Seder, was there a storyline, or how could you do it? I could see that being a seasonal thing, but they did it every Saturday night, or
No. It was just once, I just watched it
one?
more than once.
Got it. I remember, I've been doing media for a long time, and one of the first live events on the internet, I think in 2000, was the Cyber Seder. There, and and that was 28K, 56K modem. And then they had like a kind of like a cyber Jewish New Year's, and they blew the shofar on it, but with a tinny microphone that you could, so there's a certain parallel, I think, to how being stuck inside the pandemic, thank goodness there was bandwidth, and technology. So you could, it was a little overdone. My teenager, he watched Friday Night Lights, all 8 seasons 3 times, during COVID, when we thought he was on homework, but nevertheless, that you were able to connect. And and on wisdomfeed.com, our site, we have an excerpt from the book, and you talk about being, I guess, your grandparents or observed were Shomer Shabbat. They were strict on the Sabbath, and they had like legit seders.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it was my grandparents. I moved in with my grandparents when I was 9 years old because my mother died. At that point, my parents had already separated, and so this is my father's parents, and they were quite observant, and so I was sort of thrust in that environment, but I didn't understand it. I observed it, but I didn't take it inside deeply. It wasn't that kind of meaning for me. That the sort of spiritual light for me didn't really ignite until I went to India when I was 18 and studied Buddhism.
Yeah, for me, I was never all that observant, but I remember being a kid and just loving having the family together.
Yeah.
And sneaking some Manischewitz wine. And even though it tastes like grape juice, there was some alcohol in it. But maybe that added a little bit.
That's funny.
To it. But yes, so, and that's the connection part of it. And I think in Hebrew, and I'm going to mangle it. If someone knows better, let me know. But the word beseder is good. Things are good. So I think the second part of that word is seder. And so tell me more about the arc. So the arc of the book and how it relates to that.
Well, the first thing I explored many things, many threads. But one of the early things was, when do we tend to feel most trapped? When do we tend to have most of that kind of inner feeling of oppression? And within Buddhist psychology, that would classically be greed, hatred, and delusion. Not just feeling those things, but being overcome by them. So it's not, say, feeling fear that would so much be seen as the problem, but when we take it to heart, when we add a sense of isolation to it, I'm the only one who feels this. When we think, I will never feel anything again other than this, we start to reify it and solidify it. And so it's all those add-ons that tend to cause us the most suffering. And so And yet those states, they're almost like magnets for those add-ons. It takes quite a bit.
Which was the magnet?
Well, the states like greed,
Oh,
hatred,
those.
delusion, so um,
Yeah,
it would be
yeah,
very
all the
easy to just,
defenses are down and it's just
yeah,
piles on.
yeah. So I look at those states, but I really wanted a very kind of more contemporary look at them. So for greed, I looked at addiction, addictive tendencies. For hatred, I looked at shame, which is a form of self-hatred, and distinct from maybe regret or remorse or having a sense of conscience, it's really piling on, as you say. And instead of maybe thinking with some pain, oh, I wish I hadn't said that, I'm going to try to be different in the future, or maybe make amends or whatever. It's more like, I am so terrible, I am so bad. It's like a more wholesale condemnation of who we are. And then delusion is both, it's confusion, it's being spaced out, it's being numb in situations, but also interestingly, there's an aspect of delusion that's said to be kind of fanaticism or fundamentalism. When we feel lost, we feel afraid, we're like lost in the wilderness, we're confused, and we see something, and we think, oh, that's going to make me safe, that's going to keep me, it's going to give me shelter. We grab on tight, and we don't want to let go. And so I had a lot of, it was interesting for me to explore, those aspects. And again, it's not feeling them that is the problem, it's the way we tend to relate to them. And so that's when we feel trapped. That's when we feel most constricted, fewer options. The world is shut down. And then there's the idea of a journey. What do we take with us on a journey? What might we well leave behind on a journey? And then there's all those states that are more emblematic of openness, of freedom, of connection, like loving kindness, gratitude, generosity. And it's interesting looking at them, because sometimes the things that cause us the most pain are the things that society says are the best things ever, like
Or
you
too
need
much
all
of
that.
them, or just in general?
Well, what's that?
Like in excess? Like my
No,
father.
just in general, like, that if you think about addictive tendencies, then depending on what that is for, society may well congratulate you. Yeah, you work all the time. That's fabulous, Or you cannot stop consuming. You were going to buy things till the end of time. That's really good, you know. You're never satisfied with what you have. Well, that's good, because then you'll buy more. And shame is an interesting one, because so much of the time it is promoted as the way forward in terms of conscience and sensitivity and caring. But when you really look at it, does that help? And it's the reason why something like self-compassion, which would be the opposite, is often put down as like laziness, or you have no standards anymore, or you don't have any sense of excellence. But really, if you want to change a habit, you want to learn something new, you want to make progress in something, research seems to show that self-compassion is the best engine for going forward. That if you blow it in some way, you make a mistake, and you just respond with harshness and this kind of punitive voice, it might and often will spike your performance, but briefly, then you crash. That you cannot sustain an effort toward change from that place. That self-compassion is not laziness, it's not giving up standards, but it's actually the best way to make progress. And so, that was interesting that some of the things that are promoted as the best are not the best, and some of the things that are promoted as the worst or mentioned as the worst. Like, I can't tell you how many times I've heard loving kindness is stupid, or sentimental. It's just like,
No,
uh,
but now there's science behind all this
yeah,
stuff, which
yeah,
which is so exciting,
yeah,
because I've been into this stuff since day two, if not day one, and as what is John Kabat-Zinn calls it, the lunatic fringe. Originally, like, you were just out there, and now it's mainstream, and it's in corporations, and there's science behind it. So something you talked about being lost in the wilderness, so that relates to the Seder, leaving Egypt, I guess, and also to the path from isolation to openness. So and self-compassion, it sounds like it's like shining a light in the darkness to a certain extent. And so between real happiness and real life, what's the contrast, or what's the connection of those two books?
The two books? Well, Real Life is really a program. The original subtitle was Real Life, The Power of Meditation, a 28-day program. And so it's a description of why we might meditate. In fact, the original title of that book was Why Meditate. And then I got an advanced copy of friend Matthew Ricard's book, which was called Why Meditate, and it was coming out before mine. So we had to quickly find another title. And the publisher came up with the title Real Happiness. I came up with Real Life. And at first I wasn't too sure about real happiness, mostly because the happiness part, people often equate happiness with being happy-go-lucky and being conflict avoidant and kind of supercilious, and whereas I would think of it as something much, much deeper. But I kind of have grown to really like the real part. I was on somebody's podcast once, and they asked me what happened, why I meditated. And apparently I said, because it was just these words that came out of my mouth, I said, I sit down and get real, which they quote back to me. It's a friend, he quotes it back to me all the time. And I quite like that, because that's what happens, I think, for us. When we meditate, we sit down and get real. And so real happiness is really, it's got all these different meditations and instruction and stories. And real life is more that journey. It's like there's a lot of meditations in the appendix in the back, but there are lots of ways of making that journey, not only through meditation, for sure. And so
Right.
I see life, it's like about being authentic in a way. And it's odd at a time when, for most of us, our lives are pretty virtual.
And it's, having, one 20-year-old and a teenager, it's like, how much is too much authenticity? If, my teenager's taking pictures of himself, Snapchatting to his friend all the time. And it's like, is that a what, but I think there's a search for authenticity, something that's real, trying to capture the moment, especially was all, I think, exacerbated when everyone was separated. But keeping it real, no, and I get that. And it's kind of an aside, but since you mentioned, one of the things we like to do, so this is the StreetSmart Wisdom Podcast, and we have Wisdom Feed and Wisdom Feed Plus, a new kind of community that we're building. And we try to have one takeaway or something that people can do on their own, so is there any suggestion or prompt or for self-compassion that someone might be able to do, maybe that ties into the book or something like that you could share with us if you're in a state, or if you're not in a state?
Yeah, well, meditation practice is a perfect example of what we need to do in other moments in our lives. And so let's say if you're sitting down to meditate and the style you use is placing your attention on something like the feeling of the breath, just the sensations of the in and out breath, which would be a common style. That was the first instruction I ever got when I went to India to learn how to meditate. And my first thought was, that's stupid. I came all the way to India and I'm being told to feel my
I could have
breath.
done it. I could have done it at home.
I could have done it. I could have done it in Buffalo where I was going to college, like, what's that about? And then I thought, how hard can this be? Like, what'll it be, like 800 breaths, 900 breaths before my mind wanders? And to my astonishment, it was like one breath. And then I'd be gone, and way gone. And it took me the longest time to actually believe what I was hearing from those teachers, which was that's okay. Minds are trained to wander. What's really important is how you come back. So it's a practice of recovery, learning how to begin again. It's a practice of resilience. And even though I didn't believe it for the longest time, I think it was the most valuable thing I ever learned in meditation. Because every day, what happens? We make a mistake, we have to start over. Or we fall down, we have to pick ourselves up or let someone else help us up. We start over. Like every day, we realize this path is not that great. We need a course correction. And so how we start over is where the self-compassion comes in. It's self-compassion makes it easier to start over rather than spending the next 7 hours berating yourself for having had your mind wander. So in some encapsulation of that is really, again, it doesn't have to be through meditation, but in those moments, reminding yourself, this is part of the human condition. People make mistakes or lessons learned. This is how you learn. Don't call yourself a failure. Some way of saying that to yourself and making that like a new habit is a pretty good idea.
Wow, that's cool. That's actually really helpful. And I always mangle the quote, but a rocket ship going to the moon is off course 97% of the time. It's always course correcting. And so that's a parallel metaphor if it's not.
That's great.
No, that's helpful. That's great. So I think what we'll do, if you have anything else to say about the book, and then we'll have some questions for a couple minutes, and then we'll do the second part of the conversation.
Sure. I mean, part of what I was really trying to emphasize in the book is that when we see those tendencies in ourselves, like fear, jealousy, not to put ourselves down, but we're creating a different environment altogether, so that we don't have to think about annihilating those experiences, but being in a different relationship to them. And that's really what the journey is made of, is that different relationship. And the other part of that is actively cultivating qualities like gratitude and loving kindness, which is like an experiment for most of us, and often one where I use gratitude a lot as an example. Many people are taught, gratitude is like stupid and it's something that, makes you like you're being told to be grateful for crumbs. You're not going to really take a stand on trying to seek change or something like that. But it's really not true. And one of the nice things about the science is that it's showing it's not true. That people who practice gratitude have some energy. They don't feel so depleted and overcome and kind of that inner impoverishment. And so because of that energy, they can better seek change. And also people who are practicing gratitude have a strong impulse to pay it forward. They want other people to be happy. They want other people to have some sense of sufficiency. And that too makes for a very creative energy. And so that's a part of it too, is like stretching a little bit and looking at those qualities and seeing where we might experiment with them.
Got it. So if anyone has any questions, you could put them in the chat, or we'll go for 5 minutes. If people have questions, you could unmute yourself or turn your camera on if you like, or just type something in and I'll be happy to read it.
I have a question. Sharon, I'm curious, with coming out of the pandemic, re-entering, did you find new things about yourself that you say, I wish I had known that before, or that this is great? Or did you really get back to the old you?
Well, I'm definitely not back to the old me because I'm still not traveling. I would wear a mask wherever I go. I have asthma. I recently was in the hospital with pneumonia, although not COVID related. So I have not been inside in a restaurant since March of 2020. And, like many people, I have to look at risk benefit things, and say, well, is it that important to me to get inside a restaurant, or would it be more important for me to, do something else? And so um, I feel I don't know, it's going to be very odd for me, like for uh, the transition many people have already made. Um, I've felt partly it's based on that question, that I mentioned, like asking myself repeatedly, like what's still true, and I felt like things winnowed down like they did for many people, and I have been practicing a lot, and there were things I thought of in the beginning of the pandemic that didn't happen. Like I thought I'm going to learn Spanish, I didn't learn a word. I'd seen someone on TV say, I thought that if I only had enough time, I'd really clean my house. Turned out time was not the problem. That didn't really happen either. But what I did do, and I feel it's continuing, and I hope it does continue, is that I tried to really practice kindness. So, for example, I never wrote out an email and just press send. I'd write out the email and read it again, and then think, so I really want to send this as written, or maybe I want to edit it some, and usually I did edit it some, because it's such a funny form of communication and can so easily be misconstrued. And that feels really good. And I would hate to see that fall away as I get busier. I have still only been teaching online thus far. I'm sure that will change, as time goes on, but I'm really in the habit of reading those chats, and I feel a kind of, it's almost like a living example of the loving kindness. Like, some things I read in chats were unforgettable. Like, I'm a resident in a nursing home. I haven't had a visitor in a year. Things like that, and I have a friend who just went into a nursing home. I thought, I'm going to go visit, something like that. And so mostly I feel like I'm at the very beginning of a process. A lot of other people are further on than I, but I'm really hoping that the kind of tender, good things can endure.
Mhm.
And I don't know when I'm going to get another airplane. It's kind of interesting.
Yeah, I tend to feel like with kindness, as you have kindness for others, there becomes a connection very often, not with everybody, but a lot of times you'll be kind with somebody and the feeling back and forth is terrific, maybe like from the heart space.
Yeah.
I recently went to movie theater for the first time to see the the Air Jordan movie. First time I was in a theater in 3 years. I was like, first we walked in, we went with our family, and we walked in and it was empty. And I'm like, at least it's the first experience is empty. And then people started streaming in late and the place was packed. And I lived, but it's a whole new kind of reality. But I live to tell the tale. That's the good news. Anyone else have a question? A quick question, then we're going to go on to the next section. Scott, do you have something to say, or should I got to unmute? Okay.
Bear with me. I went to IMS back in 1980 for the first time, and I didn't know what I was doing. And I brought a pack of all kinds of toys and things to occupy me because I was afraid of what would I do there. And then I never went back to the bag. And that was really unnecessary to share with this. But what I'm really wondering about is when you talk about that you've only been doing the online experiences, how do they compare to the depths of what you've done in person?
I feel they're as deep. I mean, in the beginning, I got up here and the center had to close maybe 3 or 4 days later. It was still open when I got here. And then, it was a big priority to me that it not just close permanently. I mean, I helped start the place. I thought I want to hit 50 years. I thought, please, that we're so close. Like I don't want it to just. And many places have not been able to reopen. So I was the one who said we've got to go online, which was very mysterious for a lot of people. And I said we've just got to do it. And of course, people. Sometimes the depth of the experience is a reflection of the suffering of the people, who are joining in together. And so if it's a casual thing, that's one thing, but it's if all you've got, or you're in a nursing home and you're not getting any visitors, or people, would say, I'm stuck in this little apartment in New York, it wasn't like people who were in like a place with a yard, it was like some tiny little thing. Or my kids can't learn online. It's really desperate situation, or because everyone just opened because we had to, then it was a very profound experience. And of course, as life gets easier, sometimes everything gets more casual, and there's not quite that sort of intensity and heartfulness. But for me, some of it may come from being a writer. I've reflected on this a lot, because I have colleagues who just, it's too hard, like if you can't see everyone's face, if you feel that distance. And as a writer, I'm more used to really feeling close to someone who's not in the room, which is the reader. And so I think that helped actually a lot.
The other thing that I chair is I facilitate every 2 weeks a men's cancer group meeting. These are fellows that have had cancer or are going through it right now. And often, and we've been doing it through Zoom since COVID. And before that, we used to meet in person. And I'll get requested, could we come back to the center and meet in person? On one level, I've been pretty spoiled. I don't have to drive anywhere. I like being at home. I'm very content with it. Yet the truth is that I'm not there for me. I'm there for these men. And so any thoughts on that?
Well, I mean, most experiences, or many experiences, are kind of hybrid now, because the other thing I really like about being online is it's very accessible. I've worked a lot with caregivers in recent years, so people might not be able to leave their person and go to a retreat center or a meeting, but they can do it online. It's affordable, more affordable for a lot of people. And it's international, depending on what's going on. It's like, if I'm doing a thing for, say, the Rubin Museum, which has very much wanted people to come back in, and come into the museum. I started a mindfulness sitting there many years ago, and it was actually the last place I've taught on in person. It was at the Rubin Museum on March 9th, 2020. In a completely airless room down in the basement with everyone high anxiety. And, I went online with them as well, and, taught a lot of their mindfulness classes. And then they decided they were going to stop them being online because they so much wanted people to come back in together. But, in a situation like that, looking at that chat, people are signing in literally from Abu Dhabi and Thailand and Malawi and Colombia, and as well as all over the United States. And and I thought, really, you think this is going to work? And it didn't work. So now they're saying that it's going to be a hybrid experience, that some people will gather, some teachers will be there. I'm not going to be there. I'll be zoomed in, and people will be able to watch it also if they're not there. And that takes some skill, because it's hard to be inclusive and have the people online feel that they're really a part of things. But we just had the first hybrid retreat at IMS ever, where Joseph Goldstein was teaching. He was in the building with a certain number of colleagues, and then you could also sign up just to do the whole thing online, but get teacher support from different group of colleagues. Or you could just choose to audit it and just see what was going on online. I think that is got a lot, but yeah, would I drive to, see people who really wanted to come together? Probably,
All right.
I have one more comment, Steve, and
For you, we'll let you, because Scott, you're the best.
well, I don't know about that, but I'll take it while I get it. So, I've had disrupted sleep for years, age, illnesses that I had. And what I've chosen to do, which I think is actually working, but I hadn't really ever thought about why is it working. So when I wake up in the middle of the night, I go to the bathroom and then I can't get back to sleep. What I do is I lay down again and I put my fingers on my nose because I want to force it to breathe. And I will say in and out and do that. And the longer that I go that route, I conk out and I get a few more hours. So I figured you're here and I might as well ponder if you have any responses to that.
I think it's good. I think you are a noble person. Because I thought you were going to say, I pick up my iPad.
No.
Which is a bad habit. But really, I thought that's what you were going to say, because many people do pick up my phone and I start reading and I can't go back to sleep. No, that's good. I mean, some people do loving kindness meditation at that point. Other people would do something with the breathing. It sounds excellent.
Thank you.
Nice. So Sharon, can we go a few minutes over past 2:00 or?
Hopefully not too many.
Not too many. Okay, so we'll do a quick one. So we do this thing. So thank you so much for talking about the book and taking questions and the insightful input from everyone. Been great having you as a guest. And